Hello everyone, welcome to our first podcast, Per Streets. My name is Yenzo.
I'm Cameron.
And this is our first episode. So how are you feeling about today's episode, Cameron?
I'm feeling very excited. It's a topic that has been on our minds for quite some time. And I think it's a very relevant topic because the concepts of technology in cities are constantly evolving. And it's something that we need to talk about. And I really think that I love this perspective that we're taking in terms of centering women's voices.
Yeah, absolutely. And the streets look and feel different depending on who you are. And that's what this discussion is about and why this discussion is so important. And so let's dive in. When we talk about women's experiences in urban spaces, we're essentially talking about a gendered experience, and for many women, just moving through the city isn't a neutral experience. It's shaped by constant awareness of risk and vulnerability. And the planning field has long recognized this. We've recognized that the city is not the same for everyone, for both men, women, children, and so on. And we see that in Gouws' reading, he speaks of a concept of the matrix of domination, which is basically about challenging the conventional narratives and that often neglect the complex, socially constructed nature of inequality. And it shows how feminist perspectives can reshape our understanding of urban spaces within the city,
Right, and that's not just the fear of crime or violence, although those are very real threats. It's more about looking at the micro decisions women are making on a daily basis to navigate urban spaces or even public space. It could be through how to dress, which route to take, whether to walk alone or in a group, whether to go out after dark. And it's a very frustrating process to be in. And I think that Michael Wayne's 2013 reading, she talks about this direct relationship between urbanization and gender-based violence. And she says that women are constantly having to recess how, where, and when to move. And it's something that's really frustrating. And she also talks to how if we need to, it's mainly underpinned by patriarchal norms or power-laden urban fabrics that kind of dictate safety.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And the statistics back this up. The studies have consistently shown that when women feel unsafe in urban spaces, this impacts their access to opportunities, to work, and to social life. And Sandra Cock actually speaks about this in her article she wrote in 2000, where she challenges planners to view the city as a contested space where diverse cultural and social experiences converge. Right? And her analysis reminds us that effective planning involves understanding and managing social differences, right? And ensuring that urban design not only accommodates physical needs, but also fosters inclusive social interactions amongst all residences.
Yes, and I was also reading on Gouws' 2017 work, and what she talks about is the concept of feminist intersectionality. And it's basically stating that urban spaces aren't a neutral infrastructure, but it's kind of imbued by social and cultural power dynamics. Especially for women, this can really underpin the experience of urban spaces and give rise to gendered experiences, as I think you touched on. And it's something, if we want to create and move towards more inclusive and safe cities, we need to start understanding their stories and wanting to empathize and hear from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we'll be exploring throughout this podcast. How and why digital tools are being used by women to navigate these challenges and what it means for the future of urban safety, right? All right, Cameron, let's get into the digital era. Can you even imagine navigating the city without your phone? I know I can't.
Honestly, Inza, I would be lost, literally and figuratively. But as women, it's more than just having Google Maps on your phone, but it's more about or moving towards digital tools or platforms that are becoming more like reporting mechanisms and almost serving as digital lifelines for a lot of us.
Yeah, exactly. let's break down what digital platforms are. So from my understanding, digital platforms are basically an online space or an app where people can connect, share information, or in our case, reports on things like unsafe streets or incidences. And I like to think of it as like a virtual meeting space, except instead of sharing coffee, you share real-time safety tips.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is if we kind of think back to the persuasion seminar, and specifically the reading on He and Chen's, they talk about this analysis of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and digital platforms that are emerging, and more specifically how it's being increasingly integrated into urban design and planning. And so that in itself reflects a very long-standing conversation that we need to have in the planning profession, in terms of what is the role of technology in society and even in planning in itself, and that could range from things like service delivery or participatory processes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about individual empowerment. On that same reading by He and Chen from 2024, they further explain that when individuals, in our case that being women, when they use such digital platforms to report these urban challenges or identify safe routes, they're not just acting on their own behalf, they're contributing to a pivotal local data. And local data is so important because it's very rich and very difficult to get, and in doing so they're actually contributing to a bigger pool of data that can influence urban planning decisions. It's like crowdsourcing safety, and it really shows how tech can be a tool for social change if it's used right.
Yeah, but as always, as planners, we need to be more critical about these things, right? So not everyone has access to these digital spaces, and often it can reinforce these old biases or inequalities, right? And it's something that we need to think about, and we'll definitely get into that in further episodes.
Yeah, for sure. So digital platforms, they're not just about gadgets. It's also about them being real agents of change within the city. Let's keep that in mind as we dig deep into women's experiences within the city. All right, Cameron, before we wrap up, let's get into the heart of Fem-Tech, which is the lens which we are looking at our podcast from. It consists of core principles that make digital safety tools actually work for women within the city.
Yes, and one of the big principles that we're using to define this newly found lens is known as intersectional data collection. So in such a principle, what we're seeing is it's more than statistical analysis or counting numbers, but it's really about understanding this whole concept of feminist intersectionality, where women's experiences are not just thought through a single axis, but through different aspects like their different backgrounds, the racial groups, classes, or even marginalization itself. These all define and form different experiences of women. And if we understand that, then we kind of understand the types of data that we're collecting. It can form tailored safety solutions rather than just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, and that's where Prof. Vana's 2015 reading actually speaks on empty signifiers, and he reminds us that knowledge, power, and experience are deeply connected within the city. He also criticizes the gap between the rhetoric and the reality of cities within participatory urban planning. And he questions whether the marginalized voices are truly included in decision making. And if we want safer streets, we're going to have to ask ourselves whose voices are actually being heard and whose voices are being left out.
Yeah. The next principle we want to get into is known as digital resilience. And with this principle, it's more about evaluating the gender-sensitive solutions the app itself forms or tries to, output. And it's really to understand whether that has an impact in women's expression of their agency and their freedom in cities.
Yeah, and finally, digital advocacy. So this is where tech companies, planners, and communities come together. We need startups and platforms that put safety and access at the center of their design. You know, when digital tools are built from a feminist and inclusive values perspective, they can actually shift how urban spaces are planned and experienced.
Yes. So Fem-Tech and this new lens that we're trying to create is more than just trying to introduce the latest app or the latest gadget, but it's really about understanding how it's really about understanding the conversations around technology, safety, and gender, and how is that impacting planning, and how is that impacting women's safety.
Yeah, and that brings us to the end of our first episode of Her Streets. Cameron, I have to say today's conversation it really reminded me of how much the city is shaped by who gets to move through the space safely and who doesn't.
Absolutely, and so I think it's so clear that women's experiences are nothing but neutral, and if we want to understand the city, we have to understand women's experiences through it.
Yeah, and as planners, researchers, or just city dwellers, it's our responsibility to keep questioning, who is the city really for? You know, can we use technology, data, and advocacy to make it safer and more inclusive for everyone?
Yes. And I think we really hope that today's episode really sparked conversation around this. And, you know, we hope that, or we will go much more deeper into these discourses around technology and safety. And also how digital platforms are really allowing this exploration of women's safety and, their expression. And also how they reclaim their streets.
Listen to Her Streets. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep walking with us as we rethink urban spaces one story at a time.